Success does not always arrive with applause, and it does not always bring warmth from those closest to you. Sometimes it walks into a room and quietly changes the way familiar faces look at you. The same people who once spoke your name with ease now measure their words. Conversations shift. Respect fades without explanation, and you are left wondering how progress, earned through sacrifice and discipline, became a reason for discomfort rather than pride. This is the part of success no one prepares you for. The moment when growth creates distance, not because you changed your values, but because you outgrew expectations placed on you long ago. Your ambition disrupted comfort, your discipline exposed hesitation, your independence removed the need for approval, and in that silence, subtle resistance took shape. Not loud, not obvious, but persistent. Disrespect does not always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind jokes, doubts, and casual dismissal. Today's message is not about resentment, and it is not about blame. It is about understanding the emotional cost of rising in spaces that only loved you when you stayed within limits. Because once you recognize why success triggers discomfort in familiar places, you stop shrinking to maintain peace, and you start walking forward with clarity, strength, and quiet authority. Your growth breaks the old family contract. Growth does not arrive quietly, and it certainly does not arrive without consequence. Long before success shows its results, families establish invisible agreements, unspoken roles that define who leads, who follows, who sacrifices, and who remains dependent. These arrangements are rarely discussed, yet they shape expectations, behavior, and respect. When you begin to grow beyond those limits, you are not merely improving your life, you are disrupting a system that once relied on your predictability. In many families, love is unintentionally tied to familiarity. You were valued when you stayed in your place, when your dreams felt manageable, and when your ambitions did not challenge the balance of power. Your role may have been the supporter, the quiet one, the peacemaker, or the one expected to compromise. Success changes that role. It gives you confidence, financial independence, emotional strength, and a voice that no longer trembles. And the moment you no longer fit the role assigned to you, discomfort begins to surface. This discomfort is not always expressed openly. It often appears as subtle remarks, lowered expectations, or a sudden reluctance to celebrate your progress. Questions are framed as concern, but they carry doubt. Advice is offered without being asked, not to guide you, but to pull you back into familiar territory. What you experience as disrespect is often resistance to change. Your growth exposes the fragility of agreements that were never meant to be questioned. When a family operates on an old contract, stability depends on everyone staying the same. Your success threatens that stability because it proves transformation is possible. It challenges long-held beliefs about limitations, effort, and destiny. For those who chose comfort over growth, your progress feels like an accusation, even though you never spoke one word against them. Instead of reflecting inward, some respond by diminishing your achievements, reminding you of past mistakes, or treating your success as temporary or undeserved. There is a painful irony in this dynamic. The very qualities your family once encouraged, hard work, patience, resilience, become unsettling once they produce visible results. Your discipline turns into distance. Your ambition becomes stubbornness. Your self-respect is mistaken for arrogance. In truth, nothing about your character has worsened. What changed is your position. You no longer rely on the same approval, and that independence alters the emotional hierarchy within the family. Breaking the old family contract does not mean you rejected your roots. It means you stopped living according to limitations that were never yours to carry. Yet for those still bound by tradition, fear, or unresolved regret, your evolution feels like abandonment. They may believe you think you are better than them, when in reality you simply chose to be better for yourself. This misunderstanding creates distance, and that distance often expresses itself as disrespect. It is important to recognize that this reaction is not proof that you did something wrong. It is proof that growth demands adjustment from everyone involved. Families that thrive through change are those willing to update their expectations. Families that resist change often attempt to restore balance by pressuring the successful member to shrink. This pressure may come in the form of guilt, silence, or emotional withdrawal. The message is subtle but clear. Return to who you were and peace will be restored. But returning is not an option when growth has already occurred. You cannot unsee what you have learned. You cannot unbuild confidence once it has taken root. And you cannot pretend to be smaller without betraying the effort it took to rise. This is where emotional strength becomes essential. Understanding that disrespect is not a reflection of your worth, but a reaction to broken expectations, allows you to move forward without bitterness. True maturity lies in refusing to fight the old contract while also refusing to live by it. You do not need to justify your growth or seek permission to evolve. You honor your family not by shrinking, but by carrying yourself with humility, consistency, and quiet resolve. Over time, some will adjust, others may not. But your responsibility is not to restore comfort at the cost of your future. When your growth breaks the old family contract, it reveals a powerful truth. Success does not change who you are. It reveals who was prepared to grow with you and who was only comfortable when you stayed behind. Your independence exposes their insecurity. Independence is one of the quietest forms of power, yet it is also one of the most unsettling. When you become independent, emotionally, financially, mentally, you remove an invisible pillar that many relationships unconsciously lean on. Your success no longer requires constant reassurance, permission, or approval. And while this freedom strengthens you, it can deeply disturb those who built their sense of comfort around comparison, control, or dependency. For some family members, your independence is not interpreted as growth, but as separation. They were used to being needed, consulted, or emotionally centered in your decisions. When your confidence becomes self-sustaining, their influence feels reduced. This loss of relevance often goes unspoken, yet it creates an internal unease. Instead of acknowledging that discomfort, insecurity quietly steps in, and insecurity rarely announces itself honestly. Insecurity does not always look like jealousy. Often, it disguises itself as concern, skepticism, or unsolicited advice. Your choices are questioned more than celebrated. Your plans are analyzed for risk rather than recognized for courage. Achievements are met with silence, while small setbacks are magnified. This imbalance is not accidental. When someone feels threatened by your independence, minimizing your success becomes a way to protect their own sense of worth. Your independence also reflects possibilities they never pursued. It reminds them of dreams postponed, risks avoided, and paths abandoned for safety or approval. Without a word, your progress reopens chapters they thought were closed. That reflection can be uncomfortable, even painful. Rather than facing those emotions, some people redirect them outward. They frame your confidence as impulsiveness, your boundaries as coldness, and your self-trust as distance. What makes this dynamic particularly difficult is that it often comes from people who genuinely care about you. Their insecurity is not always rooted in ill intention, but in unresolved fear. Fear of being left behind, fear of losing authority, fear of confronting the gap between who they are and who they once hoped to become. Your independence, without trying, brings these fears to the surface. As you grow, you may notice a shift in how conversations feel. Support becomes conditional, praise becomes rare, your opinions are challenged more aggressively than before. These are not coincidences. Independence changes the emotional balance of relationships. When you no longer depend on validation, others must face the reality that their approval is no longer your foundation. For some, that realization feels like rejection, even when none was intended. It is important to understand that insecurity often seeks control. When people feel unsure of their own value, they attempt to regain stability by influencing yours. This may show up as guilt, reminders of past dependence, or subtle attempts to make you question your direction. The goal is rarely to harm you, but to restore a sense of emotional balance that existed before your independence emerged. However, independence is not an act of rebellion. It is the natural outcome of growth, effort, and self-awareness. You did not distance yourself to make others uncomfortable. You distanced yourself from limitation. The discomfort others feel is not caused by your success, but by the contrast it creates. That contrast forces self-examination, something not everyone is prepared to face. The challenge for you is to remain grounded without becoming defensive. Reacting with anger only reinforces the false belief that your independence is an attack. Instead, calm consistency becomes your strongest response. You do not need to explain every decision or prove every achievement. Your life, lived with clarity and purpose, speaks louder than any justification. Over time, some will grow alongside you, inspired rather than threatened. Others may continue to resist, holding on to insecurity rather than embracing change. Accepting this truth allows you to move forward without resentment. Independence does not require isolation, but it does require emotional honesty, both with yourself and with others. When your independence exposes insecurity, it teaches a final lesson. Your success is not responsible for managing the emotions it awakens in others. You're allowed to stand confidently in your growth without apologizing for the strength it took to get there. Familiarity makes them forget your value. There is a quiet danger in being too familiar. When people have known you for a long time, they often stop seeing you as you are and continue seeing you as you were. Your past becomes the lens through which every present achievement is judged. In family settings, this familiarity can slowly erase recognition, not because your value has disappeared, but because it has been overshadowed by outdated memories and fixed perceptions. Those closest to you remember your early struggles, your mistakes, your moments of uncertainty. They remember a version of you that was learning, dependent, or unsure. When success arrives, it clashes with the image they have carried for years. Rather than updating their understanding, some cling to the old narrative. It feels safer to believe you are still who you once were than to accept that you have transformed through effort and resilience. This resistance is rarely conscious. Familiarity creates comfort, and comfort resists change. Your growth demands mental adjustment, and not everyone is willing to make it, so your achievements are treated as exceptions rather than evidence of lasting progress. Your ideas are heard but not fully respected. Your confidence is questioned. In their minds, you are still catching up, even when you have clearly moved ahead. One of the most painful aspects of this dynamic is that strangers often recognize your value before family does. Outside your familiar circle, your work, discipline, and presence are taken at face value. Inside it, everything is filtered through history. Past limitations are remembered more vividly than present capability. This does not mean your family lacks care. It means familiarity has frozen their perception in time. When people forget your value, they often speak to you differently. They interrupt more easily. They offer advice where respect would be more appropriate. They assume authority over your decisions without acknowledging your growth. These behaviors are not always intentional, but they reveal a deeper truth. Familiarity has replaced curiosity. Instead of asking who you have become, they assume they already know. This can create an internal conflict within you. You may feel torn between honoring your roots and demanding recognition. You may question whether you are expecting too much or whether your success truly matters if it is not acknowledged at home. These doubts are understandable, but they are misplaced. Recognition delayed is not recognition denied. Your value does not decrease because it is overlooked. Familiarity also encourages comparison. Family members may unconsciously measure you against your former self rather than your current standards. Progress that would be celebrated in others is normalized in you. Effort is expected, not admired. Strength is assumed, not appreciated. Over time, this dynamic can make you feel invisible in spaces where you once sought connection. Yet, there is a deeper lesson hidden here. When familiarity makes others forget your value, it teaches you to internalize validation. You learn to respect your own progress without needing constant acknowledgement. This is not emotional detachment, it is emotional maturity. You begin to understand that growth is personal before it is public and meaningful before it is recognized. It is important, however, not to allow this pattern to harden your heart. Bitterness only reinforces distance. Instead, clarity becomes your anchor. You can remain respectful without shrinking. You can remain connected without surrendering self-worth. Sometimes the most powerful response to being undervalued is consistency, showing up as your evolved self without explanation or demand. Not everyone will adjust their perception at the same pace. Some may eventually see you clearly once your growth becomes undeniable. Others may never move beyond familiarity. Accepting this reality frees you from chasing approval where it cannot be given. Your responsibility is not to convince others of your worth, but to live in alignment with it. When familiarity makes them forget your value, remember this. Being underestimated does not erase your achievements. It simply reveals who is still looking backward while you continue to move forward. Your boundaries feel like rejection to them. Boundaries are often misunderstood, especially by those who benefited from your lack of them. When you begin to succeed, you learn the value of time, energy, and emotional focus. You no longer say yes out of habit or guilt. You choose carefully where your attention goes. This shift is healthy and necessary, but to some family members it feels like a personal loss rather than a sign of growth. In families where access was once unlimited, boundaries arrive as a shock. You were always available, always accommodating, always willing to adjust. Your success changes that pattern. Responsibility increases, focus sharpens, and suddenly you are not as reachable as before. What you see as self-respect, others may interpret as distance. What you experience as balance, they may label as coldness. The misunderstanding begins here. For many, boundaries disrupt emotional expectations. They were accustomed to your constant presence, your emotional labor, your willingness to absorb pressure without complaint. When that changes, insecurity surfaces. Instead of asking why you need space, some assume you no longer care. Instead of recognizing your growth, they personalize your limits. Your boundary becomes their rejection. This reaction is rarely about the boundary itself. It is about the loss of control and familiarity. Boundaries redefine relationships. They shift power from emotional obligation to mutual respect. For those who relied on your compliance, this shift feels threatening. They may respond by questioning your priorities, criticizing your availability, or suggesting you have changed for the worse. In truth, you have changed for the better. It is important to understand that boundaries do not mean abandonment. They are not walls built to exclude others, but structures designed to protect what matters. You set boundaries not because you value people less, but because you value sustainability. Without limits, success becomes exhaustion. Without clarity, generosity turns into resentment. Boundaries preserve both growth and connection. However, explaining this rarely brings immediate understanding. People interpret boundaries through their own emotional needs. If they feel entitled to your time, your limit feels like denial. If they relied on your constant reassurance, your independence feels like distance. Their reaction is shaped more by their expectations than by your actions. This is where emotional strength is required. You may feel pressure to over-explain, to soften your boundaries, or to return to old patterns to restore harmony. But harmony built on self-neglect is fragile. It demands constant sacrifice and offers little respect in return. True balance may feel uncomfortable at first, but it creates healthier relationships over time. Maintaining boundaries without hostility is a skill. It requires calm repetition, consistency, and patience. You do not need to defend every decision or justify every absence. Your tone can remain respectful even when your stance is firm. Over time, some will learn to adjust. Others may continue to resist, not because your boundaries are unreasonable, but because they challenge long-standing dynamics. There is also a deeper realization that emerges during this process. Not everyone is meant to have unlimited access to you at every stage of your life. Success demands selectivity. This does not diminish love, it refines it. Those who truly care will learn to meet you where you are, not where you used to be. When boundaries feel like rejection to others, it reveals an important truth about your growth. You are no longer living to be endlessly available. You are living with intention. This shift may temporarily strain relationships, but it strengthens your sense of self. And a strong sense of self is essential for sustained success. In the end, boundaries teach both sides a lesson. They teach you that self-respect is non-negotiable, and they teach others that access to your time and energy is a privilege built on mutual understanding. When you hold your boundaries with clarity and compassion, you honor not only your growth, but the future you are building. Disrespect is a test of your emotional strength. Disrespect does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it appears quietly, in changed tones, reduced acknowledgement, or subtle dismissals. When success enters your life, it brings visibility, and visibility invites reaction. Not all of it will be supportive. For many, your progress becomes a mirror they did not ask to look into. And in that moment, the way they treat you becomes less about who you are and more about what your growth awakens within them. Emotional strength is revealed not when you are praised, but when you are questioned without cause. It is tested when your intentions are misunderstood and your achievements are minimized. The instinctive response is to defend, to explain, to demand fairness. But real strength lies in restraint. It lies in understanding that not every challenge requires a response, and not every form of disrespect deserves your energy. When family disrespect follows success, it often carries an unspoken message. Return to what was familiar, and harmony will be restored. This pressure can be subtle, expressed through silence, withdrawal, or disappointment, rather than open conflict. The test here is not about proving your worth, it is about deciding whether you will shrink to preserve comfort or stand firm in your growth. Emotional strength means resisting the urge to internalize dismissal. It means recognizing that disrespect is often rooted in confusion, fear, or unresolved insecurity, not in an accurate assessment of your value. When you stop absorbing negativity as truth, you free yourself from emotional dependency. You no longer seek validation from those unwilling to give it honestly. This does not mean becoming distant or indifferent. Strength is not coldness, it is clarity. You can remain respectful without becoming reactive. You can acknowledge feelings without surrendering your direction. Emotional maturity allows you to hold two truths at once. You can care deeply about people and still refuse to let their limitations define you. One of the most difficult aspects of this test is silence. There will be moments when defending yourself feels necessary, yet explaining only deepens misunderstanding. Emotional strength teaches you when to speak and when to let consistency speak for you. Over time, your calm persistence becomes a response more powerful than argument. It shows that your confidence is not fragile. Disrespect also tests your capacity for forgiveness, not as approval but as release. Holding on to resentment keeps you emotionally tied to the very behavior that hurt you. Letting go does not excuse the action, it simply removes its power over your future. Forgiveness in this sense is an act of self-preservation. As you grow, you may realize that emotional strength requires redefining closeness. Not everyone who shares history can share your present. This is not a failure of loyalty, it is an acceptance of reality. Relationships evolve, and emotional strength lies in allowing that evolution without guilt or bitterness. The final stage of this test is self-trust. When external respect fades, internal respect must remain unshaken. You trust your effort. You trust your discipline. You trust the path you chose. This trust becomes your anchor when opinions shift and support feels conditional. It allows you to continue forward without losing yourself in the process. Disrespect, when met with emotional strength, loses its power to wound. It becomes information rather than injury. It shows you who can grow with you and who must be loved from a distance. And in that realization, you emerge not hardened, but refined, steady, self-aware and unafraid to continue rising, even when the climb is misunderstood.